Senator Sharon Keogan, please.
Thank you, and thank you, witnesses, for coming in here today to give us a greater insight into the roles that doctors and the physicians and the nurses have within this particular debate. So, I was very touched by one particular paragraph that was read out here this afternoon, and that was by Dr. Chokchinov. I hope I've got that right. So
Excellent.
The paragraph actually read, "A wish to die is an expression of human suffering. Clinicians must learn to sit down and lean into discussions exploring the nature of patients' anguish, discerning their sources of distress, identifying potential solutions or mitigation strategies, recognising that even the very acknowledgement of suffering, like feeling a burden to others, or no longer feeling like a person they once were, is a form of affirmation that can sustain patients' sense of worth and safeguard integrity of personhood." I thought that was a very powerful paragraph, and I wanted to say it again. So my questions are initially for you, Dr. Chokchinov. How could an intensive caring model be rolled out here in Ireland? Within the palliative care model medical professions, are there further supports that could be considered in our hospitals here? Should we be focusing on dignity therapy rather than assisted suicide legislation as a better way to deal with the complexities and hard cases that are often emerged in these discussions around the end-of-life care? You explain there's a link between acknowledging a patient's personhood and healthcare professional job satisfaction. Can you tell us more about this relationship and how it impacts on the healthcare professions? And also, do no harm. It's a central overriding concern of all doctors. So how does the wish to die context, as you describe it, impact on the medical profession? So I'll get one more question in, and that is in relation to Dr. Neil. And thank you as well. Conscientious objection has been mentioned by every single witness here this morning, and the importance of retaining that within our legislation. So you mentioned there is evidence that levels of conscientious objection to assisted dying are relatively high within the health professions. Why do you think that is the case? And what concerns have you surrounding the legislation of assisted suicide and how it can normalise its availability in society? And the next question for you, Dr. Neil. It will be essential for the freedom of conscientious objection to be protected, should assisted suicide be legislated for. A failure in this regard would run a risk of losing healthcare workers who would pay the price of their job rather than breach their conscience on this matter. So are you aware of any examples to where legislation for this has already led to problems among healthcare workers in other jurisdictions? Thank you. I'll just finish with those two, and if I can get answers to those, it'd be great, and I'll come back in.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
Yeah, Dr. Neil maybe first.
Okay, so I think your first question was why there are high levels of conscientious objection to assisted dying. I think just because of the cultural norm that we have, that the taking of life is wrong, and that it's this practice sits very close to that. I think what's noteworthy, the BMA in the UK did a big survey of healthcare providers, of doctors, in 2020. And it was very notable in that survey that those who were most opposed, so doctors were mainly opposed to being involved in assisted dying, even those doctors who said that they were not against a change in the law, were against having to participate themselves. And those who were most opposed, the specialisms that were most opposed, were those that work with patients at the end of their lives. So doctors in oncology, in palliative care, in geriatric medicine, GPs were also very opposed. So there are these high levels of objection in the healthcare professions, and that was just doctors. So obviously it's important to bring in the views of other healthcare professionals as well. And your second question, I've forgotten.
Second question was, are you aware of any examples where legislating
Yes.
this has led to problems among healthcare workers?
So not so much. In the UK, obviously, we haven't legislated for this yet. But in relation to abortion, the conscience protection for abortion that we have in the UK is quite limited. And I am aware of healthcare workers who've left their jobs because they didn't feel sufficiently protected, because the protection that we have in the UK only protects people against having to be directly involved. So those whose roles would bring them into indirect contact with the process,
Thank you.
I know of people who've left their jobs in that context.
And Dr. Chokchinov?
Well done. Thank you for that. Dr. Harvey would be fine, by the way. So many questions. Let me try and answer some of them relatively briefly so that we can at least touch on some of the key ideas. The first thing you ask about is intensive caring and what can we do to try and incorporate intensive caring more broadly. I certainly am doing everything that I can to make this as universally available as possible. As I say, it was published in the Journal of Clinical Oncology. There are, at this point, 1,000 downloads per month. It was the topic of an invited lecture in honor of Dame Cicely Saunders at King's College this year. So I am doing what I can to get the word out. And I think that essentially the ideas that are embedded in intensive caring are really at the heart of palliative care. As long as you promise not to tell anyone, the essence of intensive caring in some ways is old wine in a new bottle. But if that bottle makes it more attractive for up-and-coming learners to know that the essence of palliative care is about these core principles that provide patients affirmation, respect, that are based on connectedness, then I think that it will serve palliative care well. The second thing that you were asking about is, well, what can we do to maintain patient dignity? And actually, it's a very important question with respect to this issue of hastened death. The reason that I embarked on studying the issue of dignity in the first place is in the Benelux countries, there were some studies that were done that showed that the reason that patients had sought out assisted death more so than any other reason, according to Dutch physicians who reported on this, was lost sense of dignity. And so we have begun to study dignity and have been studying dignity for a number of decades. Again, not from the vantage point of a political agenda or with a moral axe to grind. We are empiricists, so we have produced the literature that has shown that dignity means different things to different people. And if we are going to support dignity, we need to do more than, for instance, simply try and support or try and reinvigorate patient autonomy. Folks with dying with dignity, for example, would say that autonomy is the penultimate reason why patients should and ought to access or be able to access assisted dying. We know that maintaining dignity exceeds far beyond that. And again, at the risk of repeating myself, and this is actually from a table in one of the papers that we published, if you look at, according to patients, what supports their sense of dignity, first and foremost, not being treated with respect or understanding, feeling a burden, feeling they no longer have control, feeling they haven't made a meaningful or lasting contribution, and the list goes on. And that's in a descending order.
Thank you, doctor, and thank you.